Hey there folks, I'm Mike and this is ranking the D&D 5e classes for CMCC builds. With 1 D&D releasing sometime this year and 5e coming to an end, I'm going to be doing a lot of retrospective type videos. That means a lot of 5-minute builds so people can get quick looks at popular builds of the previous 10 years and tier rankings like this one. I know people prefer tier rankings right when something launches or releases, but the optimum time to do a tier ranking is actually at the end, not the beginning, because we have so much experience and data to judge that which is being ranked. We have 10 or so years with 5e. What we know now has certainly changed any ranking we would have given in 2014 or 15. The landscape has changed and the data points have changed. All that said, these are my rankings, my opinions. If you want to quantify something like class power levels, good luck. Instead, we need to reason our way to a result. To that end, judging criteria matters. I'm looking at a few things. 1. Power levels of the class from levels 1 through 20, without subclasses considered. What can the base class do, and how does that compare to other base classes? 2. The strength of the subclasses. A weaker base class can be made up for by the strength of its subclasses. 3. Multi-classing power. Classes that have more flexibility or pair well with other classes to create powerful builds will be more highly valued. Weak features won't detract from a class or subclass, but it certainly won't add to them. Having a bad feature is generally the same as having no feature, so we'll treat it as such for our purposes here. To kick things off, we have the Artificer. In terms of flavor and thematics, this class was a hard F for me. And over the last couple of years, I've done a complete 180 and it fits firmly in S tier for thematics. I think it's really cool and really fun. The builds I've done on this channel had a lot to do with that, right from jump with my loop build. But we're not judging based on the feel of the class. How does it stack up in terms of power? As a half-caster, they have access to some solid spells. In fact, I like their lists better than Paladins and about the same as a Ranger up until level 9 when Rangers pull away. The tabletop builds and pack tactic crowds are gonna fight me over that, but I don't value Pass Without a Trace quite as high as they do. Artificers have access to cantrips without the Tasha's fighting style, and round up when determining spellcasting level for multiclassing, which makes them unique and gives them an edge over other half-casters. Of course, they're still a half-caster, but they do get some really cool and some decently powerful features. Guaranteed magic items through infusions can be a big deal, and it certainly helps lock down your build because you can rely on getting access to the items and weapons your class can make. Flash of Genius is a very solid feature that unfortunately gets outshined by the Paladin's aura. Magic Item Adept allows for the use of more magic items through additional attunement slots. This can range from pretty good to busted depending on the magic items available to you. Spell Storing Item, which can be passed to your homunculus to allow for double concentration on spells, might be the best feature of the entire class. The 4 subclasses have 3 solid options, with only the Alchemist being flat bad, but no super powerful options, and the intelligence-based casting stat limits the multi-classing options to basically a 1-level dip for wizards who want armor, healing, and constitution saving throw proficiency without losing spell slot progression. It's a nice addition to D&D for that reason, but doesn't have the power or variety here to really move it up the tier ranks. Artificer comes in at a solid C. Next up is the Barbarian. The tanks and damage dealers, except they get out-tanked by wizards and out-damaged by most of the other classes. Their best feature is Rage, which simply doesn't have enough uses for most of a player's career to be entirely reliable. Their worst feature, Brutal Critical, is one of the worst features in the game, and they get it multiple times. Their subclasses range from the absolute bottom of the barrel with Berserker to pretty good with Zealot and Ancestral Guardian, and with few exceptions, they just don't have the draw or incentives to multiclass except to get out for better classes like Fighter or Druid. Their Rage casting caveat makes multiclassing with any casters generally a very bad idea. Again, some exceptions do exist, but they're certainly not top tier builds in terms of power. Barbarian makes a very strong case for the worst class in the game, F. Onto Bard, our first full caster. Their spell list has a lot of strong spells and standouts from level 1 to 9, but there are some big gaps. No shield spell at level 1, no Misty Step, Spike Growth, or Web at 2, none of the great AoE damage spells at 3, etc. Despite those weaknesses, they do consistently have good control, support, and healing options. Their features have a couple of stinkers with Counter Charm and Song of Rest, some good options like Bardic Inspiration, Jack of all trades, Font of Inspiration, and Expertise, while Magical Secrets is a fantastic feature that allows bards to shore up their spell weaknesses by accessing any spell list in the game. The problem is, it comes on a little bit late in the game at level 10. The Bard subclasses are pretty much all solid. Eloquence is a clear standout, but I don't think it's broken. And there is an argument to be made that it's a top tier subclass. I don't think an argument can be made that any of the subclasses are actually bad. As for multiclassing, the Bard is a charisma-based class, which means it has some of the best multiclassing options in the game, and certainly the most synergistic. Unfortunately for the Bard, the most powerful charisma-based options tend to focus on the other 3 classes. Bard is a very solid B. Cleric, a full spellcaster that has medium armor proficiency and shields, a notch above the Bard because of the shields, and a touch above Druids because of the metal armor caveat. This can even be a bit more powerful via the level 1 subclass options afforded to clerics. The cleric spell list is also quite strong. The major knock on this list tends to be the lack of higher level spell options. I tend to agree, but the spells clerics get at high levels can be incredibly powerful. Planar Binding, Hero's Feast, Conjure Celestial, Divine Word, and other strong options. Class featured Channel Divinity previously ranged from pretty bad to quite powerful, and they've all had their floor raised post Tasha's with Harness Divine Power to replenish spell slots. Other features, Turn or Destroy Undead, are situationally great, but Divine Intervention succeeds too infrequently to be relied on. The Cleric subclasses really raise the power levels of the class. Peace and Twilight Cleric are 2 of the best subclasses in the entire game, maybe outdone by only the Chronergy Wizard. They also happen to be front-loaded, making them 2 of the most desired dips in the game. The remaining subclasses decrease in power level from there, but there's still plenty of great options. Nature and Knowledge, probably the 2 worst, but even those are still decent. The multi-class options are plentiful given the first level subclass and the fact that the subclasses, not the class itself, gives heavy armor proficiency, so it doesn't need to be taken as your starting class. Cleric is borderline between A and S, but for me, S tier. Up next, the Druid. A full caster with one of the best spell lists in the game. Let's talk for a second about Spike Growth. We all know about Pass Without a Trace and the Conjure spells, some of the most powerful spells in the game, even if you use rules as written and intended, with the DM choosing the creature that is summoned. That said, I feel Spike Growth gets slept on more than it should. It's an absolute monster at lower levels. And even at higher levels, creatures without flight or teleportation or strong ranged options kind of just have to eat a bunch of turns and damage to get out. Is it as powerful as summoning a bunch of polymorphing pixies? No, but it's quite a bit more likely to not be banned at your table. And Druids get it at level 3. Their spell list has the best summoning options, fantastic control options, strong healing and support, and even some unique AoE damage options through spells like Spike Growth and Call Lightning. The spell list does lack strong teleportation options, which is a big reason that it's not quite the strongest list in the game. The Druid's features are pretty much limited to spellcasting and the thematically fantastic, but variably powerful Wild Shape. Despite being the 5e Druid's iconic ability, it just isn't as powerful even with a Moon Druid as the Druid spellcasting feature. I do want to mention that I may be one of the few people that would like to see a shapeshifting class that uses an expanded Wild Shape feature without spells. Basically the Druid from Honor Among Thieves. I think it could be really fun if done right. Okay, the Druid subclasses, again, have no bad options. Dream is probably, definitely, the worst, but even that subclass fills some gaps in the Druid spells and features. The Moon Druid is incredibly powerful in early and late game, and the Land Druid juices up the Druid's best feature, spellcasting. The Shepherd Druid enhances the best Druid spells, and the Stars Wildfire Druids offer some incredibly fun gameplay and unique uses for your lackluster Wild Shape ability. As a Wisdom caster, the Druid has some decent multi-class options. The medium armor and metal caveat causes some limitations, but despite that, there are some decent Moon Druid, Spores Druid, Wildfire, and other builds. But the multi-class options aren't plentiful, and as a dip, the Druid really isn't a thing. Druid comes in at a low S tier. Now we have the Fighter, a martial class that some people debate power level with the Barbarian. Frankly, there is no debate. The Barbarian is inferior to Fighter in nearly every way. No class gets more ASI feats, which matters because most martials require Sharpshooter or Great Weapon Master, along with other feats to be effective. Fighters also get one of the best and most sought after non-spellcasting features with Action Surge. They're the only class that gets 3 and eventually 4 action-based attacks. The Fighter subclasses range from embarrassingly bad with Purple Dragon Knight to incredibly powerful with Echo Knight and Rune Knight. Even Battlemaster and Eldritch Knight are strong options, and Psy Warrior is a fun if slightly less powerful option. As for multi-classing, it doesn't get much better than Fighter. Literally every class in the game can benefit from Fighter levels. And dips can range from 1 level for con saves and heavy armor to 2 levels for Action Surge for both casters and martials, to 3 levels and up for some of the strong subclass options. Fighter comes in at a high D. Alright, here comes the good stuff. The Monk. The worst class in the game, right? Well, no. We know that now. We've seen how powerful straight class monks can be via the Gauntlet, and when optimized, the Shadow and Mercy Gunk are 2 of the most powerful martial builds in the entire game. But monks don't have spellcasting, which greatly limits their peak power levels relative to all classes in 5e. There seems to be a consensus out there, I believe originating from friend of the channel, Chris at Tree at Monk's Temple, that monks are fine early game and drop off a cliff in tier 2 and beyond. The truth, however, is exactly the opposite. It is indeed correct to state that the lack of key points is an issue for monks, but this issue exists primarily in tier 1. By level 5 and beyond, the monk tends to have enough ki, especially with short rests, to facilitate the use of their abilities, which overwhelmingly rely on key points to activate. Along with the increase in ki, monks continue to get situationally strong abilities. The thing with situationally strong abilities is that people tend to rate them lower because they are situational, which is fine. If you can only use it half the time, it's not as powerful as a feature that can be used 100% of the time. But here's the thing with many situational features. If you have a lot of them and they cover different situations, they tend to become less and less situational. In other words, you have a tool in your utility belt for any situation. Ranged attacks can get shrugged off. Falling damage, LOL. Dex saves, no prob. Charmed or frightened, meh. Poison, pfft. And by level 14, with proficiency in all saves, with opportunity to re-roll failed rolls, the monk becomes a defensive stalwart in most, if not all, situations. All of that said, some of the best additions to monks came with Tashas that allow monks expanded use of weapons through dedicated weapon, key-fueled attacks to gain an additional bonus action weapon attack, which is huge for sharpshooter builds, and focused aim to turn misses into hits. This ability can be legit insane. Check out the Monk Gauntlet run to see that ability in action. If you want deep dives into Monk's features, including the power of Stunning Strike, check out my videos here. The Monk subclasses like Fighter range from absolutely terrible to quite powerful with Shadow and Mercy Monk. The difference here is that Monk lacks those middle ground subclasses that Fighters have. Extremes only for the Monk. They're also a dual stat class with the same stats as the Ranger, which limits their multiclassing options. The multi-class Gunk is arguably the most powerful martial build in the game, but after that, the options just aren't there. This stops the Monk from moving into C tier. The Monk moves into D tier, tied with the Fighter. The Paladin, a charisma-based half-caster with limited ranged capabilities and some of the best features on any melee class. Lay on Hands is a solid feature that scales well. Divine Smite and the associated spells are pretty good, but often overrated. The Paladin's aura is incredible and comes on early enough that it's relevant for most campaigns. The level 7 subclass feature tends to build on that aura's functionality, with their level 10 feature doing the same by preventing the Frightened condition, along with the saving throw benefits of the level 6 aura. At 11, they get a bit of a boost to their damage through improved Divine Smite, rather than another attack like Fighters. Their channeled divinities are based on subclasses and range and power levels, but like Clerics, Harness Divine Power raises the floor on these because of the spell slot recovery. The issue with Paladins is that their spells aren't nearly as powerful and their slots not as abundant as Clerics. In fact, there's a strong argument to be made that Paladins have the weakest spell list in the game. That's not to say they don't have good spells, they do, and unique spells like Find Steed and Find Greater Steed, which go a long way to round out certain Paladin builds. Their spell list excels at healing, support, and solid damage spells like Destructive Wave, Smites, and weapon/damage enhancements. Paladin subclasses are all good, with Watchers being the clear favorite. A boost to everyone's initiative is an absolute game changer. I personally like Vengeance through level 6 more than Watchers, but it can't compete after 7. The worst subclass may be Crown, and even that gets access to Spirit Guardians, which adds consistent AoE damage, an area that complements Paladins perfectly. This is honestly one of my favorite spells for Paladins since they're engineered to be in melee unlike most full casters. Finally, the Paladin excels at multiclassing. They're charisma based, so multiple full casters synergize with them. They have access to heavy armor, so low level dips often work well. They have so many jump points from 2, 3, 6, 7, 8, 10, and 11 that multi-class build options are truly expansive. Their strength requirement is the one thing holding them back in this area. Paladins are a strong B. Up next, Rangers. Probably my favorite class, to be honest. I grew up playing D&D and reading all the popular D&D novels in the 80s and 90s, what can I say? Rangers are very similar to Paladins as half-casting martials. The big difference is Rangers excel at range fighting and use dexterity instead of strength as a primary stat. Dexterity is much, much better than strength in 5e. In life? No. In 5e? Yes. Initiative, AC, save, stealth, and ranged weapons are a massive upgrade over big melee weapons, heavy armor without a movement penalty, carrying capacity, 5e jumping, and athletics. This is not a small difference, yet it's often overlooked. As half-casters, Rangers select spells instead of prepare them, like both Paladins and Artificers. Why? Who the hell knows? Druids prepare spells, Clerics prepare spells, why don't Rangers? But they don't, and that matters. In terms of spell lists, Rangers are easily the best of the half-casters. Goodberry, Entangle, Postashas, Pass Without a Trace, Spike Growth, Conjure Animals, Plant Growth, Conjure Woodland Beings, and others highlight the best part of the base Ranger chassis. I'm going to skip the pre-Tasha's features as many of them are just garbage. Post-Tasha's added skills, expertise, additional spells, added movement, speed, and modes, additional damage, more fighting styles, and invisibility on top of fixing one of the primary subclasses, all add to a class that originally relied mostly on the power of its strong spell list. And those subclasses, which originally featured one of the worst in the game with the Beastmaster, now sports no bad options, with Monster Slayer or Hunter pulling up the rear, and Gloomstalker being one of the best subclass options in the entire game. Multiclassing with Ranger is a bit limited due to the multiple stats, but unlike Paladins, Dex tends to be easier than Strength to multiclass. Unfortunately for Rangers, Wisdom, although more important than Charisma, doesn't have the same powerful multiclassing options. That said, arguably the most powerful build in the game, the flagship Ranger, featured here, is a 6-class Ranger multiclass build, and plenty of other powerful builds rely on Ranger for contributions. One thing holding back the class in this category is the power level of the Gloomstalker, so far outpacing the rest of the class that most builds will choose only this option, foregoing the remaining subclasses because of how front-loaded Gloomstalker is. Ranger pre-Tasha's is a C, but current Ranger post-Tasha's just inches out the Paladin at B. If you search on YouTube for class tier lists, the first result lists Rogues as S tier. Will from D&D Shorts, who's a friend of the channel and legitimately one of the nicest content creators out there, has a tier list with nearly 500,000 views, and he also ranks Rogues as S tier, which kind of blows my mind because Rogues suck. Sorry guys, we're supposed to say Monks suck, but it's Rogues, they're bad. Are they worse than Barbarians? Let's see. Rogues get skills, so do Rangers, and skills aren't particularly powerful in the first place. Cunning Action is nice, but again, not super powerful. They do get some nice defensive abilities like Uncanny Dodge and Evasion, along with Cunning Action, which makes Rogues decently resilient, not unlike the Barbarian's Rage, but mediocre resilience a powerful class does not make. The primary Rogue feature, Sneak Attack, adds damage, but at the expense of extra attack, and a single attack means Sharpshooter's draw is greatly limited. Builds that take advantage of off-turn attacks to double up on Sneak Attack can work well, but those are limited and often inconsistent. The damage itself isn't very good, and if you don't have a means for multiple attacks in a turn via multiclassing, which decreases Sneak Attack damage potential, or a bonus action attack, it can be downright disastrous if you miss, especially at higher levels. Rogues do get extra ASI feats, but unlike fighters, the extra ASI doesn't come until level 10. Difference between 6 and 10 for an extra feat is light years apart. Many builds rely on 2 to 3 ASI, and the difference between getting that online at level 6 or 8 versus 10 or 12 is massive for most campaigns. The subclasses are not good. There are no standouts for me. Arcane Trickster gets spells, but the schools aren't the best wizard schools, and the progression is extremely limited. Phantom makes one of the best straight rogue builds in the game, but that comes online really late, while Soul Knife is also a decent option. There just isn't a lot here. Does Rogue have the worst subclass options in the game? Maybe. As for multiclassing, Rogue is a single stat class, and Dexterity is maybe the best stat for multiclassing. But with so few strong options and subclasses attained at level 3, there aren't a ton of powerful builds that want Rogue. Assassin being the big exception to this rule as it functions well with Surprise and Nova Sneak builds. But it's not enough. Coming into this, I wanted to put Rogue ahead of Barbarian actually, but I just can't. Rogue is an F, the worst class in the game. Next up, we have the Sorcerer, a full caster with a Wizard Light spell list. They have access to some incredibly powerful spell options from Shield, absent from most other lists, Silvery Barbs at level 1, Misty Step and Web at level 2, Counterspell and the big AoEs and control spells at 3, Dimension Door and Polymorph at 4, but starting at 5, the absence of Wall of Force, Contingency, Simulacrum, and others causes it to lag behind other lists, until 9 when it gets Wish and Meteor Storm but lacks Foresight, Shape Change, and True Polymorph. Worse yet, Sorcerers get extremely limited spells known, and don't have preparation options or ritual casting. They do get more cantrips than other classes, but who cares? For a full spellcaster with some great concentration options, having Constitution saving throw proficiency is unique and nice. It can realistically save you a feat. But the real draw for Sorcerers is the Charisma spellcasting modifier and Meta Magic. This is indeed a powerful feature that often gets overvalued because of Quicken Spell. A bonus action spell actually works better in martial classes that can use their action to do good things without using leveled spells. That said, Twin Spell can be extremely powerful. Subtle Spell can be a lifesaver against enemy casters with Counterspell. Beyond that, the other options are fine, but are either too expensive or not powerful enough to be extremely impactful. Font of Magic allows you to make more spell slots, which is great once you have enough sorcery points. As for subclasses, sorcerers have mostly solid options, with wild magic being a bit weaker than the others. Divine Soul and Shadow stood out prior to Tasha's, but post Tasha's, Clockwork Soul and Aberrant Mind blew the rest out of the water. They take the two biggest sorcerer weaknesses, lack of spells learned and spell list options, and immediately rectify them by adding a ton of spells learned and expanded list options via access to other spell lists. Super powerful subclass options. In terms of multiclassing, this is really where the sorcerer excels. Con saves, a level 1 subclass, full spell slot progression, and a charisma modifier makes the sorcerer a very desirable option for a ton of builds. Even builds you wouldn't consider can often benefit from a dip into sorcerer for the shield spell and con saves. Sorcerer is an A. Okay, the Warlock. I absolutely love the unique spellcasting the Warlock gets. I wish all classes did this. Warlocks with their short rest recovery, Wizards with their spell books and ritual casting, Sorcerers with innately learned spells, and Clerics and Druids would have unique spellcasting mechanics too, but alas, not happening. Warlocks, however, are full casters with a decent list, but definitely on the weaker side when compared to other full casters. They lag behind other full casting classes in spells known and spell slots, but they recover them on a short rest, which means that nobody casts more mid-level spells than the Warlock from spell levels 2 through 5. That means from character level 3 to 10, the Warlock is casting more top-level spells than any other class in the game, assuming even a reasonable amount of short rest between long rests. They also are the only casting class that gets a cantrip that splits beams like Eldritch Blast, resulting in damage mods and additions from spells and features like Hex and Hexblade's Curse stacking for each beam. Invocations are also unique to Warlocks and provide some powerful options and customization options for your build. Many of the more powerful choices simply augment the Warlock's Eldritch Blast, making it do more damage, adding forced movement, or extending the range. Some others, like Armor of Shadows and Devil's Sight, can be powerful on the right build, but beyond that are limited in power. Pact boons themselves tend to not add too much power to the Warlock, but they come with more powerful invocations that provide strong boons beyond the Eldritch Blast cantrip. Some of these, like Eldritch Smite, Gift of the Protectors, and Investment of the Chainmaster, can be quite powerful if you're able to find room for them. And that, unfortunately, is a downside. Invocations are quite limited, with only 8 known by level 18. The subclasses are mostly okay, with Genie being a solid option, and then there's the Hexblade, the most powerful single level dip in the entire game. It's so front loaded that basically everyone hates it at this point. The fact that it comes at level 1, is front loaded with armor and shield proficiencies, access to the shield spell, and uses charisma as a spellcasting mod and attack and damage mod because of Hex Warrior, makes this the easiest and most sought after multi-class option in the entire game. Warlocks come in at a solid A. Finally, Wizards. Full casters that have the absolute best spell list in the game. They don't have access to all the most powerful spells, but they do have access to most of the most powerful spells, right from level 1 with Shield through level 9's Wish. They also have access to Arcane Recovery and have no need to prepare ritual spells they want to cast, further improving their casting prowess. Unlike other prepared spellcasters, they don't have access to their entire spell lists every night, rather only the spells they've copied into their spellbooks. This limits their day-to-day flexibility a bit, but spells can be found or purchased and added through level ups, making it easy enough for wizards to grow those spellbooks in most cases. The wizard boasts the most powerful subclass in the game with the Chronergy Wizard, along with a host of other powerful options from War Wizards, Abjurers, Evokers, Blade Singers, and others. The big knock against wizards is that they tend to not multi-class particularly well. They're an intelligence-based caster, so other classes tend to present better options in this regard. However, that negative tends to be a positive because often the best wizard builds are simply straight class wizards who can advance quicker than other multi-class builds, accessing those higher level spells and slots as soon as possible. So even this negative is kind of a positive. Wizards are S tier, the most powerful class in the game. No surprise there. I'm not going to rate them lower just to be different or brave. They are what they are, the best. Alright folks, thanks for making it this far. If you liked the video, please like the video, and hopefully you've seen enough to want to subscribe or check out my Patreon for write-ups of all my builds and some other cool perks. See you here next time, folks.